It was a cloudy morning when Maya Ellis walked through the courthouse doors. The air smelled like old books and polished floors, and the tall windows let in soft, cold light. She held a notebook in one hand and a quiet strength in the other. This wasn't her first time in a courtroom. But this time, she wasn't here as a legal intern. Not as an attorney. And not as an observer. She was here for her younger brother, Terrence Ellis, who had been accused of a crime she knew he did not commit. Everyone talks about justice. But Maya had spent years studying it, reading about it, writing about it, hoping for it. And too many times, she had seen it fail people who looked like her. The wrong seat. The courtroom was already half full when she entered. Most of the seats in the first rows were taken by reporters and court staff. Maya found a spot in the back row, near the far left side. She adjusted her gray blazer and sat quietly. Around her, people whispered and shuffled their papers. No one really noticed her. They saw her dark skin, her natural curls tied back neatly, and her calm posture. But they didn't see who she really was. They didn't know that Maya had graduated at the top of her law class. They didn't know she had passed the bar exam while caring for her sick mother. And they certainly didn't know that she had once written legal opinions that helped real judges make fair decisions. At that moment, she was just another black woman sitting quietly in court. A brother in trouble. As the case began, Terrence was brought into the room wearing handcuffs. Maya's heart ached, but her face didn't show it. Her brother wasn't angry, he looked tired. His eyes found Maya's, and she simply nodded. It was her way of saying, "I've got you. Stay calm." The defense lawyer stood and greeted the court with a shaky voice. Maya could tell right away he wasn't ready. His papers were disorganized, and his questions were weak. The prosecuting attorney, by contrast, was confident. Too confident. As witnesses began speaking, Maya started writing in her notebook. She noticed things others didn't: dates that didn't match, testimonies with small mistakes, and a police report that was missing a key page. Her fingers moved quickly across the paper. Her thoughts were clear, sharp, focused. If only I could pass this to the defense lawyer, she thought. He needs this correction. She knew the courtroom rules. She wasn't officially a lawyer on the case. She had no right to speak or submit documents on her own. But what she had written could help. Maybe even change the course of her brother's case. The mistake that changed everything. During a short break in testimony, the defense lawyer stepped back to his table and drank water nervously. Maya stood up from her seat, slowly, holding her notebook open to the right page. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't try to interrupt the judge or anyone else. She simply walked toward the defense table respectfully, quietly, just trying to help. That's when it happened. An officer near the table turned around and saw her coming. "Ma'am, return to your seat," he said firmly. "I just need to hand this to the defense," Maya said, her voice steady. The officer took a step forward. "You do not approach the bench. Back away now." Maya stopped where she was, still holding her notebook. And then too suddenly the officer swatted her chest with the back of his hand, knocking the notebook to the floor. It slid across the courtroom, pages fluttering like feathers. Gasps filled the room. A few people stood in shock. The officer realized what he'd done and immediately tried to speak. She moved forward: "Court rules," but the damage was already done. Maya stood still, her body stiff, her breathing quick. She didn't yell. Didn't cry. Didn't leave. She simply bent down, slowly, picked up her notebook, and stood back up. The courtroom was quiet. Even the judge paused before speaking. The judge looked directly at her for the first time. He saw her now, not just what she looked like, but how she stood. Strong. Dignified. Steady. "Please state your name for the court," the judge said, frowning. "Maya Ellis," she replied, standing tall. "And your reason for approaching the bench?" "My brother's case," she said. "I noticed a missing page in the police file. I wrote it down to assist the defense. That's all I tried to do." "You are not counsel," the judge reminded her. "You cannot interact directly with the defense table without prior approval." "I understand the rules," she replied calmly, "I've worked in enough courtrooms to know." The judge looked down at his notes. Then he looked again. Something clicked. He recognized her name. "Did you once clerk for Judge Reynolds?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "You helped write the summary for the Joseph vs. City case?" Maya nodded again. The courtroom shifted. People weren't looking at her as some woman in the back row anymore. They were looking at someone who knew the law. Who had lived it? What was about to happen would change everything. As Maya sat back down, hands shaking slightly, the judge remained quiet. But a storm was building in the silence. Not one of anger, but of realization. Something unforgettable had just happened. Because a system that thought Maya Ellis didn't belong was about to realize she did. More than anyone else in the room. After the hearing paused for lunch, the courtroom slowly emptied. The buzz of lawyers shuffling papers, the echoing footsteps across the floor, it had all gone quiet. Not because the case was over, but because of what everyone had just witnessed. Maya Ellis, the woman who had been sitting in the back row only an hour earlier, was now at the center of everyone's attention. She hadn't yelled. Hadn't cursed. She had simply stood with quiet strength, and the entire room felt it. The officer who slapped the notebook from her hands now stood near the hallway, sweating beneath his uniform. He hadn't been suspended, not yet, but the courthouse security team had already asked him to step outside. Maya sat alone at a long wooden bench outside the courtroom, notebook folded shut beside her. Her hands were still. Her thoughts, not so much. She kept hearing her mother's voice. "Don't let them take your peace, baby. Even when you know you're right, keep your peace close." Others began to see. Inside a private break room, Judge Halburn sat behind a small table, rereading a document. But he wasn't looking at it anymore, not really. His mind was on her, that woman who stood up not just for her brother, but for herself. He remembered the name now, Maya Ellis, the bright young law clerk who had once written a brilliant legal summary used in one of his most complicated cases. Her writing had helped him make a fair decision. A balanced one. She wasn't just smart, she had a gift. "How did I forget her?" he whispered to himself. Across the room, the court clerk replied, "She's not someone you forget, sir. Maybe no one ever gave her the chance to be seen." The judge nodded slowly, the weight of those words resting heavily on his shoulders. A journalist in the corner back near the entrance, a young journalist named Aaliyah Jones, sat with her small notepad and voice recorder. She had come to cover a routine court case, nothing out of the ordinary. But what she witnessed had turned into something bigger, a story that was no longer just about a trial. It was about a woman who refused to stay invisible. A woman who knew her worth, even when others didn't recognize it yet. Later that afternoon, Aaliyah would write a headline that made its way across hundreds of screens: "The courtroom silenced her." But Maya Ellis silenced the room. And people would click. And people would share. And people would care. Because courage, even quiet courage, always finds its way to the light. A call that changed everything. Before the courtroom reopened for the second half of the hearing, Maya's phone vibrated gently. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Hello. Miss Ellis, a voice spoke kindly. This is Judge Reynolds. My office heard what happened today. I'm sorry, it should have never happened that way. Maya was quiet. Judge Reynolds had always been someone she admired. Firm but fair. Detail-focused and known for remembering every law student who had worked with him. I also heard something else, he continued. Your name is being discussed. Not for handling your brother's case, though I'm sure you'd do that well, but for something else. Maya sat up straighter. There's a nomination seat opening on the community review board, and your name came up. Strong recommendations followed. I want you to consider it, Maya. A seat at the table. Your voice, officially. Her hand shook slightly. Not from fear. From finally being seen. Thank you, sir, she said quietly. I'd like to think about it. Good, he replied. But don't think too long, Maya. The law doesn't just need smart voices. It needs good hearts. Back in the room, the afternoon session resumed. Terrence's hearing continued, but this time, the atmosphere had shifted. The defense attorney, having read Maya's notes during the break, now spoke with confidence. He pointed out the missing page in the police record. Raised questions about the timeline. Cited inconsistencies. The judge allowed it all. And several times during the arguments, he glanced over toward Maya. Not with anger. With something more lasting. Respect. As the hearing ended for the day, the judge stood and said, "This court recognizes the value of fair participation. We will resume tomorrow." It wasn't much to most people. But Maya heard something in his voice, an apology hidden in the tone. A quiet conversation outside the building. Terrence walked beside his sister for a few steps before stopping to hug her tightly. I saw everything, he said. I wanted to shout, but something about the way you stood there. I didn't need to. Maya laughed softly. You always were the louder one. They walked in silence for a while. And then, Terrence said something he hadn't said in years. You should be the one up there, sis. Behind that bench. Maya said nothing. But her silence wasn't unsure. It was preparing. It had been a few days since the courtroom incident, and still, Maya Ellis hadn't stopped thinking about it. Not the slap. Not the silence that followed. And not the way people had looked at her, some with shock, others with curiosity, and a few with something that felt a lot like guilt. But what stayed in her mind most wasn't any of that. It was Terrence's voice, as they walked out of the courthouse. You should be the one up there, sis. Behind that bench. That sentence lived in her now, the kind of words that don't just fill your ears, but plant themselves inside your chest. A seat at the table. The phone call from Judge Reynolds hadn't been just words either. It was real. He had sent the paperwork the next day, an official nomination form for a vacant position on the Community Justice Review Board. It wasn't the judge's chair. But it was a chair. A seat at the table. Maya sat at her kitchen table late that night, the form spread in front of her. Her tea had gone cold, ignored. Her laptop was open, still glowing. She had filled in every question on the form, except one. Why do you believe your voice matters in today's legal system? She stared at the line for a long time. Then finally, she wrote, because my voice was pushed aside for years, and I still came back to help fix the system that ignored me." She signed it, clicked send, and closed her eyes. A visit from the past. The next day, Maya returned to the courthouse not for her brother's hearing, but to drop off documentation with the court clerk. As she stepped through the glass doors, she felt every pair of eyes turn to her. Not with disrespect this time. With recognition. Even the same officer who had knocked the notebook from her hands avoided her eyes. He nodded slightly as she passed. Maya felt the change, but she didn't gloat. She simply nodded back and walked on. As she turned the hallway toward the clerk's office, she was surprised to find Judge Halburn standing at the door. "Miss Ellis," he said. She paused. "Yes, Your Honor. I reviewed everything. The incident, your education, your past court work, and your response." "I understand," she replied calmly. "I didn't handle that moment the way I should have," the judge continued. "But I want you to know I see you clearly now." Maya looked him straight in the eyes and said quietly, "I never asked for special treatment. Just equal respect." Judge Halburn nodded. "It's long overdue." And then he said something she never expected: "Would you consider applying for a court fellowship? We need voices like yours inside the walls, not just visiting the edges." From the edges to the center. Over the next few weeks, Maya's world changed faster than she thought it would. She received a call confirming her appointment to the Community Justice Review Board. The local newspaper wrote a piece titled, "From Silence to Strength, Maya Ellis named to lead community legal reform." A women's organization invited her as a guest speaker for their annual event. Even Terrence, now free and applying for jobs again, started calling her Madam Justice just to tease her. But the truth was he wasn't far off. Because behind the scenes, more people began requesting her insight. County officials, young law students, local community leaders who had never been heard by the courts before. And through it all, Maya stayed the same, calm, organized, always listening before speaking. That's what made people notice her even more. The real fight begins, but leadership wasn't always applause. At her first official board meeting, Maya was the only black woman in the room. She noticed it right away, so did everyone else. Some smiled politely. Some didn't meet her eyes. When the topic of court officer training and courtroom dignity came up on the agenda, one board member brushed past it quickly. "We should focus on bigger issues," the man said. Maya spoke up for the first time. Respect inside the courtroom is not a small issue. It's the root of every legal relationship. If people can't walk through the door safely, how can they ever trust what happens inside? Silence. Then a few nodded. The vote was called. The motion passed. Small victory? Maybe. But in Maya's heart, it was the beginning of something big. Just getting started. That night, as she packed up her papers and walked out of the old courthouse building, Maya paused in the same doorway where she had once been pushed aside. Now, she wore a visitor's badge that read, "Board Member, Legal Oversight." Almost comically, she smiled at how far she'd come. From the woman nobody listened to the woman everyone paused to hear. She wasn't sitting in the judge's seat. Not yet. But now, every room she entered, every meeting, every courtroom, every classroom, she sat a little higher. Not on wood and leather, but on truth. Weeks turned into months, and Maya Ellis stood taller than ever. But she wasn't standing for applause. She was standing for truth in conference rooms, at community town halls, on panels where her voice used to go unnoticed. Now, people listened when she spoke. Not because of fame, but because of how she carried her strength, calmly, wisely, and without forgetting where she came from. A woman who carried her people during one evening forum in a local high school gym, filled with folding chairs and students half listening, Maya stood behind a small podium. Her voice never rose too high, but her words reached every wall of the room. "I knew the law on paper," she said. "But the day someone knocked my notebook from my hand, that's the day I had to decide would I walk away bitter, or step forward better." One student raised his hand. "What made you stay calm when they disrespected you like that?" Maya paused, then smiled gently. "Because storms don't scare a tree that knows how deep its roots go." The crowd fell silent. Then applause. Terence was sitting in the back row, watching proudly. He leaned toward a friend and said softly, "Told you, she was built for this." Trouble at the top, but not everyone welcomed Maya's rising influence. Inside the courthouse, there were quiet conversations. Some board members said she was too opinionated, others said she was changing things too quickly. One day, during a strategy meeting, a senior board member named Mr. Dalton challenged her directly. "You seem eager to rewrite everything, Miss Ellis," he said with a stiff smile. "But the system has worked fine for years." Maya replied, gently but firmly, "It may be working for you, sir. But not for the people sitting in the back rows, the ones who don't get called unless they speak twice as loud." Some board members looked away. But others? They looked intrigued. One quietly smiled. Even in resistance, Maya's voice was planting seeds. Another unexpected call. One Monday morning, Maya received an email from the Judicial Integrity Office. The subject read, "Nomination consideration for Community Court Judge District 6. She blinked. Not a panel. Not a board. Not a seat at the table, but the head of one. A temporary vacancy had opened in the community court, a real bench, a robe, and authority handling neighborhood disputes, minor cases, and first-time offenses. It wasn't the highest courtroom. But for many people, it was their first and sometimes only experience with the justice system. And the city believed Maya Ellis might be the voice it needed. She reread the email. And closed her eyes slowly. The mentor returns. Before she replied, Maya decided to visit her old mentor, Judge Reynolds. His office was lined with books, but his voice was always humble. "You've already done more in 1 year than many do in 10, he told her. "But I'm still learning," Maya admitted. "That's why you're ready," he smiled. "Judges who think they already know everything forget to listen." "You'll listen." She looked at him. "What if I fail?" He leaned back in his chair. "Then fail forward. But never fail to try." A back row remembered later that night, Maya walked past the courthouse, the same one where her story had changed. She peered through the glass doors and remembered the exact moment she sat in the back row, gripping her notebook, watching injustice unfold just feet away from her brother. She remembered how it felt to be ignored. She remembered the sting of being silenced. She remembered the moment her notebook hit the floor. But then she smiled quietly. Because that same notebook was now stored safely inside the leather bag of a judge nominee. Every scribble, every page was a reminder, she didn't fight with anger. She fought with preparation. With knowledge. With grace. Decision made. The next morning, she opened her laptop and wrote her reply to the judicial office. "I accept the nomination. Not because I seek power, but because I understand power best when I've lived without it." She hit send. And the life she once dreamed of stepped forward to meet her. The robe doesn't make the judge. A couple of weeks later, Maya stood in a small ceremony attended by a few city officials, community members, local leaders, and of course, Terence. When the robe was placed gently over her shoulders, the room clapped. But she didn't smile because of the robe. She smiled because she knew what she would do with it. She wasn't sitting to be important. She was sitting to be useful. And in the eyes of every girl who sat in the back row like she once did, she now represented hope. She didn't just take the judge's seat. She earned it page by page, step by step, word by word. And now, she wouldn't just pass judgment. She would pass understanding. Monday morning came with soft sunlight spilling through the tall windows of Jefferson Community Courthouse. The courtroom was quiet, just before the doors opened, but inside, a new kind of energy was building. For the first time in its history, this courthouse, long known for quick rulings and tired judges, would welcome Judge Maya Ellis to the bench. No trumpets. No fanfare. But something bigger. A history being rewritten. Preparation never wasted. Maya arrived early, as always. She walked past each row of seats in the courtroom, stopping for a moment at the back row. Her eyes lingered there not with sadness, but with respect. That was where it all changed. Where her voice had been questioned. Where her notebook had been knocked to the ground. Where she made the choice to stand, and never look back. Now, she'd be at the front of the room, not demanding attention, but carrying responsibility. She adjusted the black robe over her shoulders one last time. It wasn't heavy, but it wasn't light either. It held meaning. And Maya knew, this seat wasn't given, it was earned. The surprise on the docket: her clerk, an energetic young woman named Tasha, handed her the day's schedule. Pretty quiet morning. Just small claims and community restitution cases, nothing major, she said, smiling. But Maya's eyes stopped at one name on the docket. Officer James Whitman would appear in front of her, for a use of force complaint. The same officer, who had once slapped her notebook from her hand in front of a full courtroom. For a second, her breath caught. Not from fear. Not from anger. From the power of full circle moments. The courtroom fills by 9 a.m., the benches were full. Young students from a local college watched quietly. Reporters sat on the far side, not cameras in hand anymore, just pens and paper. No chaos. Just curiosity. And then, the door opened. Officer Whitman entered. His uniform had changed slightly, no more badge. His steps were slower. He sat without looking up. He clearly didn't expect her. The case begins. The case was not criminal, more administrative. A hearing to decide whether Officer Whitman's suspension should be extended or replaced with community service and training. The room was routine. Until Maya spoke. Mr. Whitman, you're here today regarding a use of force incident that occurred outside a school patrol zone. Video evidence shows unnecessary aggression during a routine check. He raised his eyes and finally looked at her. His face tightened. But not with arrogance like before. This time, it was recognition. And regret. He nodded slowly. Yes, Your Honor. Maya flipped to her notes and paused. The courtroom waited for her next words. Grace in the seat of power. Maya leaned forward slightly. I believe, many expect this moment to be dramatic. But justice is not about doing what makes a headline. It's about doing what restores balance. The courtroom held its breath. Many months ago, Mr. Whitman, you struck my hand and knocked something important to the ground. Do you remember what it was? Whitman nodded slowly. A notebook. Maya continued, no. It was my voice. Gasps rippled in the room. She straightened her shoulders. But that day did not break me. It built me. Your mistake wasn't just about disrespect. It reminded me why I wanted to become this. A judge. A protector of fairness, not just for the powerful, but for the quiet ones, the overlooked ones. Whitman looked down, unable to hold her gaze. And yet, I won't punish you with what you expected. I won't respond to hurt, with more hurt. She looked toward the review board representative. I recommend Officer Whitman, now Mr. Whitman, be placed in 6 months of community reconciliation training, assigned to assist in local youth outreach, and given every opportunity to learn not what power is, but what respect truly means. The courtroom exhaled. Not because Maya gave him punishment, but because she gave something wiser. A chance to change. After the gavel fell, as Maya stood and prepared to leave the bench, Whitman approached respectfully. He didn't speak at first, just held her eyes. I was wrong, he said, gently. I didn't see you that day. And now, you made me wish I had. Maya gave a soft nod and replied, that's the thing. People like me, women like me, we've learned to live without needing to be seen. But that doesn't mean we stop showing up. A pause. You have a second chance. Don't waste it. He nodded and walked out quietly. The lessons live on. Later that day, one of the students in the audience emailed Maya a thank you note. It read, Judge Ellis, today you didn't just become a judge, you became a lesson. Not about power. About how to carry it with purpose. That night, as Maya removed the robe and placed it neatly in her office, she smiled. She wasn't just making rulings. She was making ripples. And from where she stood, it had only just begun. It had been 3 months since Judge Maya Ellis first stepped into her courtroom. In those short weeks, people had begun calling it the People's Court. Not because it was different in law, but because it felt different in spirit. Every day, Maya wore the same calm voice. Every week, she gave out decisions that guided, not punished. And yet, on a gray Thursday morning, she was handed a case that would test everything she believed about justice. Even her own heart. A familiar name on the case file that morning, Maya sat at her desk scanning the files for the day. Her assistant, Tasha, handed her a new folder titled, People vs. Carla Watkins. Maya opened it. Almost immediately, her hands stopped moving. Her eyes froze on the name. Carla Watkins was a name Maya hadn't heard in nearly 15 years. But once, long ago, that name had made high school a nightmare. Carla was the bully. The one who had made jokes about Maya's skin. The one who once ripped pages from her notebooks and left. The one who told her, you'll never amount to anything that matters. Now, the name sat in Maya's courtroom file, a court hearing connected to multiple charges: theft, fraud, financial misconduct. Maya closed the folder slowly. This wasn't just law now. This was personal. The rules are clear. But what about the heart? Inside her chambers, Maya stood by the window, notebook in hand. She didn't write anything yet. Judge Reynolds had once told her, the moment you start mixing your emotions with your evaluations, you're no longer deciding, you're reacting. But how could she separate the two? Maya knew she couldn't recuse herself that easily. The court was small, and backup judges were unavailable for weeks. If she delayed the trial, it would hurt the system. She had to stay. But more importantly, she had to ask herself, was she strong enough to judge someone who had once judged her so cruelly? Court resumes. The courtroom was full when Maya walked in. As she sat at the bench, every eye turned, waiting. But one pair of eyes, Carla's, froze when they landed on her. Carla sat at the defendant's table, wearing a plain blouse, clutching her purse, her face filled with surprise and maybe shame. Maya gave no hint of emotion. She simply read the charges aloud. Calm. Focused. Professional. Miss Watkins, you stand accused of misusing client funds while operating as an independent accountant. You're being offered court-supervised restitution instead of jail time. Do you accept the terms? Carla slowly stood. Maya studied her face, not out of revenge but to see if she was the same person, or someone new. Carla spoke with a shaky voice. Yes, Your Honor, and I'd like to apologize before this court. I've made mistakes not just now, but in my past. And I hope one day I can be forgiven for all of it. Her words hung in the air. She didn't say Maya's name. But she didn't have to. A judgment not from anger. After the evidence was reviewed and the attorneys gave their statements, all waited for Maya. She folded her hands, letting the silence teach the room what seriousness meant. Then she spoke. This court does not ignore harm. But it also does not ignore honesty. I've watched people lie their way out of consequences. You didn't do that today. Her tone grew firmer. But ownership is only step one. You've hurt people professionally, and personally. What you do with your second chance must make up for the pain your first actions caused. Carla nodded, still not meeting Maya's eyes. This courtroom believes in justice. But it also believes in growth, Maya said, voice steady. Then she delivered her judgment: 3 years of financial supervision. 100 hours of community service helping small-income families file taxes. 2 written statements of apology to those she misled. No jail. But no escape from responsibility, either. Just the pathway through it. The quiet moment after, as people left the courtroom, Carla stayed behind. She walked slowly toward the bench. A bailiff stepped forward, but Maya nodded gently and allowed her through. Carla whispered carefully, I was cruel. Back then. You didn't deserve it. If I had known who you'd become. Maya stopped her right there. That's the point, she said softly. You shouldn't have needed to know who I'd become to treat me with kindness. A pause passed between them. Then Maya added, but apology is a decision, not just a word. Make better ones from now on. Carla nodded. I will. And then? Maya turned away. Not coldly. Just done looking behind. Terrence's words again that night. Maya sat at home reading over community reports. Terrence walked in, holding a bag of takeout food and a wide smile. Still the strongest woman I know, he said. Maya laughed. You weren't even there today. He handed over a folded note. I wasn't. But someone left this at the courthouse. It's from her. It was from Carla. It read, today, you judged me. Years ago, I judged you. The difference is, you did it with grace. That's the only kind of power that ever really matters. Maya folded the note and set it aside. She didn't need recognition. She had found something better, clarity. She wasn't a judge because she had power. She was a judge because she had learned what to do with it. The spring air was warm and full of promise as Judge Maya Ellis stepped out of the courthouse and into the sunlight. She stood still for a moment, looking across the community street. Children walked by with school bags. Parents rushed toward the local bus stop. A teenage girl rode past on her bike, glancing curiously at the courthouse doors. Maya smiled gently. Once, she had sat in the back of this very courthouse unseen, unheard, pushed aside. Now, she stepped out through the front doors, after a full day of delivering fairness. But this last day wouldn't end as usual. Today was different. Today, Maya wasn't heading home. She was heading to a place where her voice might matter even more than it ever had in court. The Youth Summit. Maya had been invited to speak at the annual Youth Leadership Summit, a new program for high school girls across the district. The theme that year was simple: your voice, your power. The invitation said, "We want you to speak, not just as a judge but as someone who once sat quietly in the very seats these girls sit in now." As she entered the high school auditorium, the sound of soft chatter and excitement filled the air. Rows of teenage girls, most of them with notebooks in hand, waited for someone to inspire them. Someone who looked like them. Someone who had faced the world and still stood tall. Then Maya stepped onto the stage. The speech they didn't expect. She didn't begin with a dramatic quote, or a long list of accomplishments. She simply said, "I want you to close your eyes for one moment. Think of that time you felt ignored, shut out, disrespected. Now, imagine what would happen if that moment became your beginning, not your end." A hush fell over the crowd. Maya continued, "Years ago, I was shoved aside in a courtroom. Not with weapons, but with judgment. My notebook was knocked from my hands. They tried to silence me. But I didn't lose my voice that day. I found it. And I carried that voice everywhere I went." She looked around the room slowly. You don't need permission to believe in yourself. You don't need a crowd to prove you're strong. You just need one moment to choose: will I stand quietly, or stand fully? The applause that followed wasn't loud because of surprise. It was loud because they saw themselves in her. One girl, one question. After the session ended, students gathered around Maya, asking questions, thanking her, asking for pictures. Then, a shy girl stepped forward. Her name was Jada. She wore oversized glasses and held a half-full notebook in her hand. I was wondering," she began nervously, "how do you stay kind to the people who hurt you?" Maya knelt to meet her eyes. "Because I believe in being the kind of person I needed when I was your age. If I carry their pain, I can't carry my purpose. But when I forgive, I leave space for my story to grow." Jada's eyes softened, and she nodded. Her fingers tightened around her notebook like it suddenly had value. Because it did. Back to the seats that once held her. A week later, Maya visited the courtroom once more, not for judging cases. Not for sentencing. But for mentoring. She had quietly requested a small corner of the courthouse library be transformed into a weekly youth law circle, a safe space for teenagers curious about justice, leadership, and voice. Now, 10 bright students met there weekly, some who had been in trouble once, some who were top of their class. They all sat in mismatched chairs, forming a small circle. Maya didn't sit on a bench. She sat among them. Listening. Guiding. Laughing. Becoming the voice behind the next wave of voices. The paint on the wall. One Friday afternoon, the maintenance team hung a new artwork inside the courthouse waiting area. It showed a girl sitting in the back row of a courtroom, holding a notebook in her lap. But her shadow stretched far ahead, forming the shape of a woman wearing a judge's robe. Beneath it were the words, "Power is not in the seat you take. Power is in the truth you choose to carry." Judge Maya Ellis. People stopped to read it. Some left with questions. But most left inspired. Legacy, not just roll years would pass. More judges would be sworn in. More cases tried and closed. But Maya would be remembered not for how many rulings she gave, but how many hearts she reached. How many voices she lifted. How many notebooks stayed clutched in young hands because she proved you don't need to shout. You just need to stand. She had once walked into court to save her brother. Now, she walked in every day to help everyone else's.